Hi there. Hello there, beautiful spiritual psychic seekers and fellow walkers on this higher path. It's Psychic Cynthia here, spiritual psychic Cynthia Killian. And today I'm logging on to talk with you about something a little heavy: spirit attachments, spirit entities, problems with spirit entities. Do you or someone you love have a problem with a spirit entity following you around, or just being in your space, bothering you, breathing down your neck, either literally or so to speak? This is a little bit heavier of a topic than what I normally focus on. I love to keep my teachings in the realm of lightheartedness and joy as much as possible. But hey, we got real world problems, right? And we need to solve them. And sometimes the real world problem is that you or a loved one is dealing with a negative spirit entity or attachment. So that's what I want to talk with you today a little bit about in a real no nonsense, practical kind of way. Okay, so let's talk case studies. Let's talk about real life people who've contacted me about this. I've noticed an increase in this last year, and I think there's a good reason for that. Actually, in the last few years, and I think there's a good reason for that. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But yes, there's been more people contacting me about it. And if you've never had this experience, well, you're probably never watching this video if you've never had this experience. But if you are watching it out of curiosity, you might think that only superstitious people have these problems, but that's not true. Simply, there's many reasons to have. Excuse me, it's my cat. It's knocking it over. There's many reasons, though, to have. You might have, this type of issue. Well, let me say this: there's many different types of situations. There's maybe only a few reasons, and so that's what we're going to talk about. So let's jump right in with a story, okay? An actual case study story. And I won't be using any names because there's no need to. Anyway, the story is about more than just one person, really. But it is based on actual case study. And recently I was contacted by a woman who actually was reaching out to ask me to help her with her elderly aunt. And the long and the short of it is that her aunt was in her 80s, and her aunt was having spirit activity. There were strange things happening in the house, things flying off the walls and noises and lights and things like that phenomenon. And then her aunt just also didn't feel at ease, and she sensed there was spirit activity. So my client was like, hey, can you help me? Actually my client was just like, can you get rid of this spirit around my aunt, Cynthia? Can you take care of this? And by the way, dealing with the dark spirits is not like my great, pastime. Like, I want to go do that. Who wants to really have to go do that? But sometimes you got to take out the garbage, right? Okay, so anyway, but I did a really quick read on it, and I mean really quick, within moments. And even though it's not maybe like my greatest hobby to do this, or interest, or passion, let's put it that way. Well, this is where you maybe need a psychic, intuitive, medium type person. I'm not saying it has to be me, but this is where those of us, maybe some of you watching, have these gifts. The gifts of, not just being psychic, but really being psychic and intuitive and mediumistic together. This really works well. So really right away, and I don't know her aunt, by the way. I don't even know my client that well, okay? But I know her a little bit. But anyway, her aunt doesn't even live here, anywhere nearby. So I could feel waves of great anger coming off of her aunt. Great, really deep, intense anger and resentment. And then I knew right away what was happening here. So I told her, I said, no, I can't get rid of the spirit, or I won't attempt to, because here's the situation. Your aunt is emanating these very strong energies of resentment. Resentment in particular is one to look for. It's very powerful. It's very powerful and attractive, it's seductive to dark spirits. Did you hear what I just said? Are you carrying a lot of resentments? Watch out. Okay, so yes, this energy, her aunt is emanating this really deep resentments. And I don't know her aunt. I don't know what she's resenting around. And then anger, deep anger. It felt like to me that this anger comes back, to childhood, really far back. So these felt like very deep emotions. And my client did say, yeah, my aunt has some issues and some recent issues with losing a partner to death. So that, I can understand if you're angry about that. I mean, actually, I can understand if you're angry about whatever you're angry about. Because whatever traumatizes you, you might have strong feelings. But she was carrying those strong feelings. And listen, this is why I said, no, I can't remove it, or I won't attempt to. Because what I can feel is that this entity that is around her, and just right at the top, I want to say, yes, I did feel an entity, at least one. But the entity was feeding, it's attracted to, hear me here, the entity that's bothering her, that's causing these little disturbances and stuff, it's attracted to her wavelengths, if you will, the energies of resentment and anger. In fact, it feeds off of it. So what I recommended, we'll get there in a second, but I want you to get this point first, that the entity, this lower vibration entity, and by the way, she asked me if I thought it was demonic, and I said, I'm not going to use that word. I don't think so, not necessarily. I think that word demonic gets thrown around a lot, and we should be careful about throwing that around. We should be careful. We shouldn't overuse that term. I'm not saying there aren't actual demonic spirits. I don't think people agree on what that even means. But I like to see things from the cosmic point of view. Imagine that. I'm a cosmic astrologer too, right? So, yes, we can look at it in terms of, are some spirits just inherently, dark and evil? Maybe. But what's going on here? It's certainly not a bright, cheerful, loving spirit. It's a spirit that feeds off of resentment and anger. In a way, this spirit is, it's fulfilling a cosmic role. Because this woman, this person, or other people like her, and there are many others that I've encountered, when you're in the situation, when you're giving off all this intense extra, it's just too much, it's extra. And how much is extra emotion? Well, if it starts causing stuff to fly off the walls in your house, you might think of it as extra, okay? So this spirit feeds on that. It's drawn to that. And, the energy has to go somewhere, so it goes towards this type of spirit. And I didn't even get into the nature of the spirit and all that. I didn't need to. It doesn't matter. And that's the other thing. A lot of these kinds of spirits, and by the way, they can feed on different kinds of negative emotions. And I'm going to use the word negative. And I know from, again, the cosmic perspective, there's no such thing as a negative or positive. There's just emotion. We could substitute the word destructive, okay, if you want to do that. We just know that some emotions are warmer and more nurturing and creative than others. And this particular type of entity does not feed on those kinds of emotions. It feeds on the more destructive, simmering, I would even use the term simmering here, simmering emotions of anger and resentment. By the way, some entities just feed on anger, some dark entities. I would use the term maybe dark here, or, I don't know, just, less than high vibration. But we don't have to judge the entity necessarily. We know that the entity is, fulfilling its place in the realm of the cosmos. And so I told, what is the solution then? Okay, you understand the problem. I want you to understand the problem isn't just that there's an entity there. That's problematic, but what is drawing the entity? What is attracting the entity is the excess rage, the excess resentment, the going over it over and over again, the simmering, the repetition, driving that destructive emotion down deep, or driving yourself into it. It's got to overflow. It's going to. And, Yeah, that's like, oh yeah, you're angry, like really, really angry, like you've been angry for like 20 years, angry or something, uh, or maybe it's not even that long, but it's just very intense, and you want to be stuck in that pattern, you want to be stuck in resentment. Oh well, let's the spirit's going to come along, it's going to feed off that energy, and it's going to help you in some ways increase it. It's going to give you something to be angry about. I mean, if somebody starts throwing your dishes around and breaking them, you're going to get angry, right? Or if the spirit's waking you up at night, you're going to get angry. Oh, you like anger? Oh, great, you got another buddy now who likes anger. Okay. Now, when you're watching this, I don't want you to think that I'm condemning, being angry, and that can be very empowering and going through the process. This is more about when we hold these things in. In fact, if you are angry and you hold it in, you may attract these kinds of entities. So, we have to learn ways to deal with these shadow emotions more constructively. Uh, which brings me to, part two of this. What is the solution if you have this situation, which some people would call a poltergeist, by the way? Uh, I don't know that I necessarily would, because I think when I use the language poltergeist, I mean, I understand that the emotion itself can actually cause the phenomenon, but here there is a spirit. And so that's more than just a poltergeist. It could originate in the poltergeist experience, but we do have an entity here. But what is the solution? Whether it's a poltergeist or a poltergeist with a negative spirit entity, that has attached itself to you or in your space or your loved one. The solution, if you've listened this far, I think it's probably become obvious to you that the solution is to deal with the unprocessed, unaddressed emotion, especially the traumatic emotions, the traumatic situations. And how do you do that? Well, it varies from person to person. I can tell you that just getting an exorcist in there to clear out the spirit will not do that. And that's why I'm not going to try to do that in this situation, because I know that the spirit will either A, just come right back, the same one, as long as that energy is there, that emotion, that really intense destructive emotion. It's unresolved emotional issues, unconscious, unresolved emotional issues. Can you hear me? Unconscious, like two. So if you can even start becoming conscious of it, that's a good start. But yeah, I mean, I didn't try to get rid of the spirit because I know even if I do, it'll probably come back right back because its food supply is there. Or if it doesn't, some other spirits are going to come right back. So, I mean, the simple solution is to remove the food supply of negative emotional energy. But, to do that, you have to go in your heart. The person who's experiencing this has to do some deep level heart work. I mean, some people call it shadow work. I just call it heart work, getting into those tender places and looking at what's underneath the anger. What are you really sad about, or what injustices, have you suffered, or maybe it's just a sadness. Looking at the resentments, and sometimes we have resentments to others when really it's because we ourselves didn't show up and do our best. Not always, but sometimes. It's working through some of that, and for a lot of people that's going to involve therapy. I mean, actual therapy, okay? Not just getting an exorcist. By the way, I said all this to my friend, in a little message, and then she said, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense, and we've gotten somebody out there to sage the house, to bless the house, to cleanse the house, we've done all these ceremonies, and nothing's worked. Well, I'm like, no. Okay, I don't want to cuss here, but I'm not surprised. Of course, those things haven't worked, because not that they're not beneficial. And I did tell her, it's always beneficial to sage your house, to bless the house. It's beneficial for other reasons. I mean, your house deserves loving, tender care, right? But that doesn't really necessarily help you deal with your, unaddressed, unresolved emotional issues. Okay, you have to deal with those. And again, I'm sorry, somebody just saging your house is not going to be enough. If anybody tells you it is, then they're just cuckoo. Okay? They're just lacking in a deeper understanding. Okay? Maybe they're not cuckoo, but they're probably not experienced enough, with these kinds of entities or with people who've had them, to understand. Yeah, it's gonna take some of that deep work of the soul. Now, this woman in this case was older, and I know she doesn't have probably, I don't know, she could have 20 years before, for all I know, but she probably maybe doesn't have as much time as some of us who are younger to spend in therapy. Uh, so rather than, and keep in mind, I'm talking with her niece, okay, not her, but so, yeah, therapy's great, but I wanted to give my client something, that she could do to help, maybe, because I know it was weighing on her heart. So there's another thing that you can do. There's probably several things, by the way, but I'm just looking at the top ones here. So you can get therapy to deal with your unresolved emotional issues. I mean, if it's not that big of a deal, you can just talk with a friend. But I'm going to say this, if you've got stuff flying off the walls or flooding, or, you just feel totally creeped out, it's probably a big deal, bigger deal than you need to maybe need professional help. And, one thing that can be very helpful, and you can do this with therapy, so I'm not necessarily saying it's a substitute, or some people do it instead of, if it's just if the emotional issue is not quite as intense, we work with flower essences, and I have done that for my own emotional issues. Flower essences, if you have not heard of them, are vibrational remedies. They're closely related to homeopathy. I know some people say they are homeopathic remedies. That's not quite accurate, because they're not mixed exactly the same way, but they're related. So if you're familiar with homeopathy, yes, the flower essences are sister remedies, let's say. They're made from flowers, though, and they seem to work very well on the subtle, emotional, mental, and psychic bodies. They work in the blueprint, where these disturbances have damaged your blueprint. I don't know how to explain it other than that. We all have an energetic blueprint, and these situations that have caused these types of intense emotions, it's like something's not right in the force, your own force, you feel disturbed, right? There's been a disturbance internally. And so the flower essences can work to help with it, to accelerate the healing. And some say they do the work for you. I think it depends on the situation, but they do some of the work for sure. So I would highly recommend flower essences. Each case is different, and different flower essences do different things. So you'll have to kind of do some investigating on that. I actually, recommended specific ones for her aunt. If you're curious what those were, I'm not saying this would be for every situation where there's resentment and anger, because, there's many different factors here besides just that. But, yeah, I don't have that list right here, but I think, off the top of my head, one of the ones I felt very strongly for was the bleeding heart. And actually that had to do with the loss of her partner. So sometimes we have deep level grief underneath all that anger and rage. We're grieving a love maybe that was lost, or somebody that went to their side. So bleeding heart flower essence is good for that, or can be. Wild rose was another one recommended for her, because she also had an apathetic, approach to life, just the blahs, which many older people suffer from. So because there's been a lot of death, and they don't feel the emotional connections as much always. So yeah, that can help with that. But yeah, hopefully you'll, work with your own flower essence practitioner. If you work with me, I can make recommendations. I actually make essences, at least at the time that I'm recording this. In this case, though, I didn't even offer to sell my client my own essences, because her aunt is living near a place where I know there's a reputable company that makes essences there, and I thought it might be more beneficial for her to have the essences made from the flower in her location. So, I just gave the name of the company to my client so that she could, purchase them for her aunt from there. But anyway, there are several flower essence companies, and you can buy them at the health food store. I can't tell you which ones are good or which ones aren't. I have my opinion on that. Certain ones I know of, but I don't know of all of them by any means. So you'll have to explore that on your own. And I do have my own line of essences that I use in my work with my clients. So, but you'll find your way. And maybe you'll learn how to make your own. You can make your own essences if you really want to spend some time in that. I will say this: if you are suffering from, you know, spirit attacks or disturbances, that's probably not a good time to make your own essences because that energy will go into the essence. Um, if you're not experienced with it, especially, it's not a good time to be learning that. So do lean upon, a trusted friend or counselor or advisor, or just, even go to the health food store. I mean, the ones at the health food store generally would not be my first pick because they sit underneath bright lights, and that does kind of impact the frequencies, I feel. But you know what? I think they have some efficacy. I do. So the ones I have tried some. So, yeah. So flower essences are gentle remedies that might help you, release some of those emotional energies that are attracting those negative entities. And that's what, one of the things you're going to just have to do however you do it. I mean, I don't know, maybe you like to go fishing or set in nature like I do. I mean, I find that setting in nature helps me, to release stored up emotional energies. And I've been doing this setting in nature a long time, okay, since childhood. um, just wherever I can in the city, even, wherever I can find pockets of nature. So maybe that will be healing for you too. It's not for everybody, I know that, but it might be for you. So start to think about that. I mean, if you start to have these kinds of problems with the spirit entities being of a negative nature, or at least a pesky nature, let's say, you might look at your own emotional state and what's going on. I mentioned anger and resentment a lot in these videos, but loneliness can also attract spirits. Not necessarily negative, it depends. I think a lot of people have spirit attachments that don't realize it, but it doesn't bother everybody. I mean, a lot of people, because they're dealing with these unresolved emotional issues, and so it's causing problems in their lives. It's attracting these darker spirits around, and also the emotions are not helpful. So yeah, I think a lot of people have this problem really sort of undiagnosed, if you will. But it doesn't affect everybody on a conscious level because, most people aren't conscious of it. I think only the people that are a little bit more sensitive and tuned in, in a psychic or mediumistic way, only they start to pick up on that there might be a spirit component or an energetic, and which I think is a good thing to be aware, but I also think it can freak you out more if you're aware, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. So yeah, I mean, those of us who are more sensitive, we're going to feel it more if we're giving off this kind of energy and attracting these kind of spirits. And in addition to working with, your traumas and your unresolved emotional issues, because that's all kind of dealing with the past. You don't only want to do that. That will keep you in the past if you only do that, okay? You want to work on creating a more positive future vibration, if you will, in the present as well. And that isn't just by thinking positive, okay? You might think that's what I'm going to say. And yeah, that's fine. Thinking positive is fine. I'm all for that. But it's more about even if you don't feel positive, okay? It's fine. Sometimes, you're like me. You might have that little inner sarcastic voice that rolls around. But we can still choose love, okay? I want you to think about that, choosing love or choosing joy in the moment. This is something beyond just thinking positive. That's kindergarten, okay? I mean, I'm happy for you if you're in kindergarten and learning to think positive. I've been there. I had to go through the thinking positive. And I go back there sometimes. I review. I say it's kindergarten, but it's also the fundamentals to think positive, to find the positive aspects of a situation. Actually, maybe it's kindergarten, but maybe it's mastery too, right? A person who can do that, on a daily basis, especially in trying times. You're a master if you can do that, actually. But you have to go through the kindergarten phase, of course, of it. But there's something beyond even thinking positive, and it's, moving into the higher frequencies of love. Love for somebody, something, whoever. Love for nature. Love for a child. love for a partner, love for a dog, a cat, the birds. True love, love for all people. As you focus on that frequency, you will attract a different kind of spirit. You will walk in the light. You will walk with the masters. You will attract miracles. Instead of all this crazy chaos with things flying off the wall or feeling somebody breathing down your neck, it's a reflection of your inner state. It's what you've called forth. And as you start to work on unraveling some of that old stuff, you'll call forth something different, especially if you start turning to the light. And when I say to the light, I mean to love. To love. So on that note, I'm wishing you much love and just seeing you immersed in the heart of love, in the heart of light, but even more in the heart of love, in the heart of that cosmic love. And that way you can step into a new reality for yourself, one that is much more pleasing and peaceful than the dramas of those spirit attachments. Alrighty, until next time, bright blessings.